All right, government students, here is part two of the 3.5 virtual notes. As we continue to talk about the presidential election, today we're going to talk about the process that a president goes through for elections, as well as some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Electoral College. Okay? So, the election process. Once you decide to run for president, there's two elections you really have to win. First is called the primary election. This is where you're winning the nomination for his or her party. Okay. This is Democrats running against Democrats, Republicans running against Republicans. Then, once you win your primary election, now it moves on to the general election that's going to be held in November of that election year. So, what's the election schedule look like? First, you have the candidates in are announcing that they're running for president. Okay, this is a formality a lot of times, and you begin to get the process of fundraising and all the other things that you have to do. Then the political parties are going to hold primaries or caucuses in all of the 50 states. Now, what's the difference between a primary and caucus? It's how it operates. For the most part, we'll look into a little bit more detail of what those is. The vast majority of states are moving to primaries. Caucuses are kind of falling out of favor in the most majority of states because they're a lot longer process. Okay? Once the primaries have been all held, we pretty much know who is going to be the nominee for both parties at that point. Okay? But it hasn't been formalized yet. The formality isn't the formal announcement is going to be made at a party's national convention. They're going to announce the nominees for president and vice president, and they're also going to go ahead and announce their party platform at that point. There's a lot of fanfare usually associated with these, a lot of balloons, a lot of speeches, a lot of clapping, all kinds of that stuff. Then we get to the actual general election. This is where we tend to think of, where all the ads come out, and you have Republicans and Democrats going against. You have the different debates that are happening here. Once the election is over in November, then it moves on to the Electoral College voting and those votes being read aloud. And then we have a formal presidency announced. So, what are primary elections? All right. If the president current decides to run again, they're going to be known as an incumbent. Again, we kind of covered this when we did congressional elections. It's the same situation here, right? But both parties are going to hold primary elections and caucuses in every single state. Okay? So even in states where a party may have a minority, they're still going to run primary elections because they want to get the most viable candidate, the candidate who is going to get the most votes. Okay? So what happens is they go through and do all these primary elections, and the voters are going to select from the available candidates the individual who they want to represent their party. Okay? There's a ton of rules related to this. They're different for every state. It's super, super confusing. Okay? The big thing to remember is primary elections narrow down the list of candidates down to one. Okay? That's the thing to walk away with the primary elections. Don't get caught up in the details because the details are different from every state and they seem to change year to year and even a lot of times from party to party because each party is running the primary, not the state itself. Okay? And that's what it is. They're pre-elections. Okay? Iowa and New Hampshire are always the first two states to hold these elections. They have state law set up to do that. It's not that they're unique in any way. This is just what they've decided to do. And these elections, again, primary goal, narrow down the list of candidates to get down to one. Okay? During primary elections, you're going to see candidates tend to play more towards their base because that's who's voting. They're not as interested in the independent voters. They're more interested in their own party, right? Because that's who's voting in that particular election. As a result of this, they tend to promote more radical ideas during primary season. And then when we finally get to the general election, they tend to back away from those ideas a little bit more. Okay? Not always the case, but quite often it is. Once we get past the primary elections, now we get to the national convention. Okay? And this is where they announce their candidates for president and vice president, and it reflects the cumulative result of all the states' primaries. Okay? A national convention is essentially a meeting of party members from each of the states, and we call these individuals delegates. And this is usually held at the end of the summer before a general election. In 2020, because of the coronavirus pandemic, both the Democratic and Republican national conventions were held virtually. So that was one of the things that kind of made it unique. When it comes to the National Convention, there's a couple of things that they're trying to do. They're trying to officially name those individuals for president and vice president. They're also trying to adopt their party platform, which we talked about when we talked about political parties. Okay? And they're trying to unify their party. They're trying to energize their party behind their particular candidate for president and vice president, as well as their other candidates for other positions. So you get a lot of fanfare, a lot of cheering, a lot of excitement built up around these particular events. Then it gets to the campaign trail. Okay, this is where elections are going to be won and lost, because this is where America is making a decision. You've got these two individuals who are running, one Republican, one Democrat. They start to develop campaign slogans. All right, they start to participate in different debates. They spend a lot of time and a ton of money in states in which the elections are expected to be close. We call these battleground states or swing states. Okay? And that's honestly where the majority of time and money is going to be spent. California doesn't receive that much attention. Texas, to an extent, doesn't receive that much attention because for the most part, California and Texas, they've already been decided, right? California is probably going to be Democrat. Texas is probably going to be Republican. It would take a miracle for one of those two to switch. Instead, these candidates look at it and say, where can I win? What states do I have to take? Right? I know I have some states safe in the bag already. What states do I have to go and get to to that magic 270? And that's that part. Then we get into the rest of the Electoral College and voting, which we talked about last time. So a couple other things related to the presidential election that you need to know. One of those, 22nd Amendment. Okay? And what the 22nd Amendment does is it limits the president to a maximum of 2 terms to being elected president or a maximum of 10 years. Okay? Why the 10 years? This is a little bit unique because you have a situation maybe where an individual serving as vice president and the president dies in office. Okay? For whatever reason, old age, resigns, even, or is assassinated. If they're more than 2 years into that president's term, then that individual isn't bound by that 2-term limit. They can serve an additional 2 terms on top of it. Okay? But if it was a situation where it happened early in a president's term, well, then essentially that first president's term is going to be the vice president's first term as well. Okay? So it's either 2 terms or 10 years. Okay? If you run for president and get elected, you're elected to 2 terms, and that's it. You can't serve like half a term and then change it over. Okay? And that was partially because of the guy on the right here, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected to a record 4 terms as president, though he died early in the start of his 4th term. Okay? So what are some of the flaws of the Electoral College? Well, number one, the winner of the Electoral College does not always win the popular vote. Okay? This has happened many instances in history. Not a ton, but enough. Okay? For example, 2016 is another one of the things that make it unique. Hillary won 84.2% of the votes in that to Trump's 46.1%, but still Trump was elected president. Okay? And that's partially because a candidate doesn't need to win the popular vote. They need to win the state's popular vote in a plurality of states, right? We are the United States after all. And because of those winner-take-all elections, it allows this type of a phenomenon to happen. Okay? In addition to that, there are a lot of voters who stay home because they don't feel that their vote counts or that their vote matters much when it comes to the Electoral College. And if you live in a safe state like California or Texas or Kansas or Wyoming, the Dakotas, if you live in a safe state, there's not a whole lot motivating you to go out to actually vote because your state's already pretty much decided. Okay? In addition, another major flaw is it discourages third party. The winner-take-all feature prevents any minor parties from being able to have much of a say. Okay? Where if you went by maybe a percentage of the popular vote based off of the votes in the electoral votes based on in a state, or if you went to a congressional district method, there's a possibility that one of those minor parties could maybe snag something. Right? And as a result, there's not really a whole lot of reasons to vote for those third-party candidates unless you really don't like either of the major 2. In addition to that, it gives most of the focus on the battleground states. Okay? places where it's going to be close, they get the disproportionate share of the attention. Well, some of the larger states with larger populations are pretty much ignored. Okay? If you live in a battleground state, that's great for you. Your vote matters a lot. If you don't live in a battleground state, your state's probably already been decided. Okay? So, in addition to that, you have the electors themselves, right? There's nothing that says an elector must vote for them. There's a number of states that have laws in place that there's going to be a legal punishment if somebody votes against the Electoral College or votes against what the popular vote in their state had suggested they do. But it's still, the vote still counts, right? And electors can go against their party if they want to, but they don't do this very often. For the most part, a lot of individuals feel that the Electoral College is outdated, that it's confusing, and that today we don't necessarily need it. Okay? We have a lot more information. We have a lot easier access to information than previously with all our different forms of media. We have easy access to transportation to be able to get to the voting places, which used to be a major challenge. And we don't necessarily always need experts choosing for us, right? These electors. We're very capable of deciding things for ourselves now. All right, so those are some of the flaws. But not everything is bad. Not everything about the Electoral College is bad, because a lot of times flaws in the Electoral College get exaggerated, right? Winning the popular vote has only lost the Electoral College 5 times. 5 times out of 56 elections. That's not an overwhelming occurrence, right? A couple of those have been more recent, right? Bush lost the popular vote, Trump lost the popular vote, but it hasn't happened a lot. Okay. In addition to that, Congress has only had to elect the president 3 times: one in 1801, one in 1825, and then 1877. Notice those are all in the 1800s. So it's been over 100 years, almost 150 years since the last time Congress has to do that. So maybe the Electoral College isn't as flawed as we are sometimes led to believe. It's a process that's known to most Americans. It makes sense to a lot of Americans, and changing the alternative doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be any better. Number 3, in most cases, it identifies a winner very quickly and clearly. It's a system that seems to work, and if you start to add up the electoral counts from each of the different states, you get 270. Yeah, we got a winner. So in that sense, it does make sense to be able to continue to use the Electoral College. And lastly, the Electoral College is very consistent with our federalist design, right? Federalism is division of power between state and national governments. Here you have the states literally choosing who the next president of the United States is going to be, right? We are the United States after all. And it's not just heavily populated regions that are making those decisions. So there are some cases here for Electoral College. What have been some proposed ways that have been at least discussed or talked about to try and fix the Electoral College? Number 1 is to get rid of it entirely and to move to a direct popular vote. This would be the most democratic. It would encourage greater voter turnout because everybody's vote counts the same. However, it would require a constitutional amendment to this, and oh my word, if you get a close election, recounting votes would be a mess. Right now, we only have to recount votes in states in which the election is close. If you had to do that nationally, it would be not only extremely expensive, but it would be incredibly difficult. So that's a major weakness of that particular method. Another way would be a proportional allocation of electoral votes. This is where the Electoral College votes in each state would be based on the percentage of the popular vote within that particular state. So your places like California, Texas, your larger states, your minority party is still going to get some electoral votes there. And it makes those votes meaningful. It would increase voter turnout for that. It would be more reflective of the popular vote. But the challenge is this would be based on state law. The states would have to decide this. And if some states do it and others don't, now you start to get problems. And there's not a whole lot of incentive for the states to do this either. Right? California, the Democrats control California. They don't want to necessarily give up electoral votes to Republicans. Same kind of thing with Republicans in Texas. It's just there's not a lot of reasons to go about this, even if it would be a more reflective reflective of the population of that particular state. There's good states you could go to the congressional district method that Maine and Nebraska are using. This would also be more reflective. However, a lot of states have gerrymandered districts, and that would have to change to really make a more fair election in these particular areas when it comes to the president. Okay. And then lastly, this is kind of an interesting idea: is the national bonus plan. Right. This keeps the electoral college as it is, but it gives a bonus number of votes to the winner of the popular vote. Okay. This could work, right? It maybe minimize some results like 2016, where the loser of the popular vote wins the electoral college, but it's still, how many votes do you give? 3, 6, 10, right? How many votes does that win by? Right, and that becomes a problem with this particular method, especially when you consider in 2016 you would have needed 38 electoral votes to change the results. That's a lot, and just winning the popular vote, I don't know if that's going to be a situation where that would be even okay to try and fix it. Right, then your popular vote is becoming just so much more powerful. So that's the Electoral College. Make sure you're paying close attention to the strengths and weaknesses of the Electoral College. You're going to have an essay on the test that's going to be based off of that. But we'll discuss that a little bit more in class. So I'll see you there.